states and places that history represents. And I'm proud to also share that my family and I lived in Minnesota for 3 glorious years before moving here to the Seattle area in Washington to so that I could take on the work of the Sibling Support Project as its director. So thank you so much for having me. Thank you everyone for being here today. Today we're going to talk about supporting siblings across the lifespan, and we're going to talk about sort of themes and experiences that come up for many siblings of people with support needs. You'll notice that I use the term support needs as kind of a shortcut for all of those developmental health and mental health concerns that Kristen mentioned in the intro. Um, and I recognize that encompasses a pretty large umbrella and many people. And so just know that that's kind of a shortcut for many brothers and sisters who we support across the globe, really. As Kristen said, the Sibling Support Project is the first national program dedicated entirely to supporting siblings. So siblings of people with support needs. Our sort of what most people know us for is our signature program called Sib Shops. And Sib Shops have been supporting brothers and sisters, school-age brothers and sisters of children with support needs since 1982. And Sib Shops are really kind of our answer for the same kind of common sense peer support that parents get from a good parent to parent program, except for they are designed for children, of course, and revolve very much around play for that reason. And I will talk a little bit more about Sib Shops during the presentation. In addition to Sib Shops, the Sibling Support Project also has a number of books and publications written not only for siblings, but largely by siblings. We talk to the media every chance we get to help promote understanding of the important roles that brothers and sisters play in their families and in their communities, the value of supporting siblings, the value that sibling support brings to the entire family, and of course, the how to of sibling support. And we'll talk a little bit about all of that in today's presentation. Just some housekeeping. If you have questions, which I hope you do, please put them in the chat. We will be reading them. And for sure, we will have time at the end of the presentation for a Q&A. Also, if I happen to see your comment while I'm presenting and it's relevant to something that I'm saying, I will try to respond to it immediately. I do see that someone's asking in the chat, and I bet Kristen's already on top of it. Um, to assign someone to
Yeah.
caption, the captioner. Yes, okay,
Yep.
she's
Thank you. Yep. Emily, I'm
she's
getting that done. Just one
she's
second.
10 steps ahead of me. Okay. So so that's a little bit about the Sibling Support Project. As I mentioned, we're located right outside of Seattle, Washington, but the work that we do really spans the globe. And I'll tell you, when I talk to people about my work and what I do, a common reaction is, wow, siblings of people with support needs. That's very niche. As if this was like a very tiny segment of the population that we are working to support. And so I like to present data and numbers to help people understand that actually siblings of people with support needs comprise a sizable section of the population. And so, for today's purposes, because we're focused on Minnesota, let's talk about how many siblings we think exist in Minnesota. So, according to the Minnesota State Demographic Center, there are approximately 668 Minnesotans, right, who report having one or more disabilities. Um, Now, you'll see, spoiler alert, you'll see that I did a little math. I did a little math there. And so this means there are approximately 534,400 siblings in Minnesota. How did I get that number? Well, on average, in the United States, approximately 80% of children grow up with at least one brother or sister. So I'm not a mathematician. As Kristen said, I'm a social worker by training, but I do have a calculator. And that's how I got that number, 534,000, almost 535,000 people in the state of Minnesota alone who identify as siblings, right? Who have a brother or a sister with some kind of disability, which I think is not niche, right? And if you start looking at numbers across the US, at the some 32 million Americans who have some kind of disability, 80% of 32 million, I'm not really sure. It might be like 23 million. I'm literally just doing this off the top of my head. But you get the picture. We're talking about millions and millions of brothers and sisters across the US and even more around the world. And so the work of the Sibling Support Project is definitely not niche and hopefully will have an impact on all of these brothers and sisters. And we're starting here today with you in Minnesota. And I'm really excited that you're here because, from what I understand, you are service providers who work with families. You share information with families seeking resources every single day. Maybe there are some parents on this Zoom. You're really the folks that we want to make sure are aware of resources that are available for siblings. But also, I want to give you a little bit of the why. I want to give you a little bit of the background of what we do by explaining why we do this work to support siblings. Because believe it or not, for many, uh, the idea of supporting siblings of people with disabilities is not the first thing they think of. In fact, um, siblings report largely that they feel sort of unseen and unheard much of the time when we think about traditional models of family support in the disability fields, in healthcare fields. If we look to see what's available in the realm of family support, usually what we're talking about is parent support, right? If you think about the family support services that you're aware of, really think about it. How many of those programs and services are for parents? Probably most of them, right? And so one of my roles as the director of the Sibling Support Project is as a sibling advocate to help people understand not just what we do, but why we do this work. So I want to share with you five things that I often tell people when I'm explaining why the Sibling Support Project exists and why we do this work. And these are things that we know from the research and from the literature about family systems and disability. Okay. So the first reason that we should all be thinking about siblings is that sibling experiences parallel parent experiences. We know this from the research, right? Pretty much anything that we can say about being the parent of a child with support needs, we can put ditto marks on for siblings. Okay. Siblings have many, if not most, of the same needs as and experiences as parents. But again, when we look at the services and supports that are available for siblings as opposed to those that are available for parents, it's really easy to see where we need to start doing a little bit more work. Okay. The second reason we should care about siblings is that sibling issues are really lifespan issues. And I want you to think about this for a moment. Brothers and sisters will be in the lives of the person with a disability longer than anyone. Okay. Longer than any pediatrician or doctor, special education teacher, clinician, and probably longer even than parents. Okay. This is a relationship that can easily exceed 60 or 70 years, which is a long time. And so sibling issues are lifespan issues, and we want to ensure that we are supporting siblings at every stage of life. The third reason we should care about siblings is that siblings spend quantity time. That's like a kind of a short way of saying that siblings spend a good deal of time together. If you look over the course of the lifespan, siblings have a high level of involvement in each other's lives, particularly at the beginning of life, maybe for the first 18 years, and then again towards the end of life, right? Maybe as they're aging, their parents are aging, maybe parents are having some health concerns, and siblings are coming together to help address those concerns. Maybe they themselves are aging and experiencing some health concerns and supporting one another. So that kind of tracks, right? That makes a lot of sense. What tends to happen midlife varies widely. And if we had more time today, we could talk about that. But if we look over the course of the entire lifespan, siblings spend a good deal of time together. And let me tell you, it's not just a lot of time, it's really important quality time. And I talk a lot about how I'm a huge fan of inclusion and inclusive classrooms if they are supported correctly, which is which is another whole webinar we could do. But I will say that no classmate in an inclusive classroom will have as great an impact on the social development of a child with disabilities as his or her brothers and sisters. Okay. Siblings are 24/7 social models. And then finally, what I think a lot of families are certainly recognizing, service providers, government officials, siblings are the next generation of caregivers. For the first time in history, adults with disabilities are outliving their parents, right? That wasn't necessarily the case 40 or 50 years ago, but thanks to more robust community-based healthcare and other services, people with disabilities are living longer than ever before, which is a wonderful thing, and creates a new need for parents and families to think about succession planning, to think about future planning. And we know that for many families, as parents age and eventually pass on, it is siblings who step into the role of caregiver in some way, shape, or form. We also know from our own research and experience working with siblings that many siblings unfortunately feel unprepared to step into that role, right? And we'll talk about some reasons why during today's presentation. But I think when you put these five facts together, today's message is pretty clear about why we should to just follow through with the metaphor of giving siblings a seat at the table, why we should include siblings in every aspect of um, talking about and planning for and planning with and talking with are individuals with disabilities, right? And why, when we talk about family centered support and family centered care, we really need to think about the family member who's going to share the longest relationship to the person with a disability. We need to make sure that siblings do have a seat at that table. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the sibling experience. And, you know, if you do this work long enough, you meet siblings who say, well, the fact that I have a sibling with a disability is the reason that I am so patient and so understanding. And I found my dream job in a helping profession. I can attribute all of these wonderful qualities and things that have come about in my life to the fact that I have a sibling with support needs. It's really been the greatest gift. On the other hand, you have siblings who say something like, well, actually, the reason that my life is all messed up is because I have a sibling with support needs. But for the vast majority of siblings, it's not all one or all the other. Okay. For the vast majority of siblings, kind of all of the above, right? At any given time. The sibling experience really is a mixed bag. We have research that supports this. Okay. A number of years ago, a team of researchers from Vanderbilt University, they've done some excellent sibling research over the years, by the way. They did this big literature review and they looked at all the major sibling studies over the past 40 or so years. Okay. And they looked at different life outcomes for siblings of people with and without disabilities. It's a great article. One of the things they say, really at the very beginning of this article, is that the sibling experience is a mixed bag, right? And, I like to point this out as in a sort of cautionary way that we need to be careful not to paint a one-dimensional picture of siblings. Okay. So let me tell you what these researchers said after looking at all of this sibling data from years and years and years. They kind of summarize there are also other potential outcomes of being a sibling to a brother or sister with disabilities. Some are beneficial, others less so. In many cases, outcomes can be beneficial or challenging at specific times in one's life or for different siblings. So, this is really important to remember when we're working with siblings, right? To just keep in mind that life for siblings, like life for all of us, has its ups and downs and is not just one thing. So I want to show you a list here of some concerns, some typical concerns that siblings experience. And don't worry, our next slide is going to talk about opportunities. So we're going to talk about the not so good, and then we're going to talk about the good. Because in our work with siblings, our goal is to minimize these concerns. And this is just a handful of common themes that come up for siblings. So we want to minimize these concerns and we want to maximize opportunities. Okay, and we're going to talk about concrete ways that we can do that. Um, and we won't have a lot of time to go to do a deep dive into these concerns. But, this will kind of give you a sense of some of the things, some of the themes that come up for many, many siblings. Now, these don't all come up for every sibling, but what we've seen over the course of time and different studies is that these are the themes that come up for many siblings. Okay. Um, I do want to talk about the need for information because of my audience today, because you guys are in the information and resources business, right? So I want to talk about how this is probably the greatest parallel between the sibling experience and the parent experience is this need for information about the disability and about the treatment plan, about what's going on for services and supports for the child or the adult with disabilities. Siblings need to have access to that information the same way that parents do. Not just because they will become future caregivers one day. And by the way, this is the number one reason siblings tell us as adults that they feel unprepared to step into any kind of caregiving role because they haven't had access to information about their sib growing up, right? They haven't had a lot of access to diagnostic information or information about service providers or how are services funded, right? Um, Even young siblings need to understand very sort of key things, key considerations, such as Um, they didn't cause the disability. They can't catch the disability, right? I often say children are excellent observers, but not the best interpreters. Many adult siblings tell us that the way they sort of figured out that their brother or sister had a disability was by overhearing conversations that their parents had, sort of putting the pieces together. And then maybe when they got older, they would do some research to really try to understand. Um, so, for all of you who are in the business of sharing information, I really encourage you to consider how you can provide information to siblings of all ages. Okay, whether that be written information, probably some of you already work with siblings who are calling to find out about services and supports. But that's an important consideration, I think, to keep in mind. Um, all of these are, I think, really understandable over identification. Am I going to develop the same disability my sib has? The same kind of isolation that parents might feel, isolation from the community, from other families who maybe can't understand our daily life, increased caregiving, resentment, when family life seems to revolve around one person, around the needs of that one person, of course, it's understandable that other children and other members of the family will could feel resentful of that. Or maybe there are unequal expectations of behaviors or chores around the house. So resentment's a big one among siblings, as is embarrassment, right? When my sib might have some socially unexpected behaviors in public that could cause some, draw some unwanted attention. And then guilt, especially after feelings of resentment and embarrassment. It's easy for that guilt to sink in. You know, I know my brother didn't mean to do that. He didn't mean to have that meltdown at the mall. He just has a hard time expressing his frustration. I shouldn't have gotten so upset or so short-tempered with him, right? Survivor's guilt. Why my brother? Why not me? And guilt over, we hear a lot from adult siblings. We talk about self-determination quite a bit in our fields, and this idea that people with disabilities should be really at the center of all of the decisions of their lives, which is true, right? Self-determination, they should be the drivers of their lives to the greatest extent possible. And I'll tell you, at the Sibling Support Project, we believe that self-determination is for everyone, including siblings. However, many siblings feel tremendously guilty for creating lives outside of their families of origin, which sort of take them away from their ability to help care for their brothers and sisters. So guilt takes on many forms. We could do a whole webinar on sibling guilt. We'll come back for that one. Maybe we'll do that one next year, Kristen. Who knows? Pressure to achieve, very, very common among siblings. And this is the tricky one, I think, because we do a lot of work with young siblings in sib shops. And, of course, we praise our kids when they do something great. Of course, we want our children to achieve to their highest ability, to their fullest extent. And we also want to ensure that siblings know that if they aren't perfect, if they have a bad day, if they fail at something, if they try something and fail, they will still be loved and appreciated and valued, right? That their value as a human being is not tied to uh, a high level of achievement, right? Or always being the helper, or always being the kid that doesn't complain, right? We want to make sure that siblings know that they're expected to, allowed to be, and really expected to be human. And to be human is to experience all the feelings, right? The good and the not so good. And we want to ensure that we're supporting siblings throughout all of these feelings. And then future concerns. We talked a little bit about this. Who will care for my sibling when we're older? Will I find a job that pays me enough to care for my family and, maybe a partner, any children I might have, and my brother or sister, right? Those multiple layers of caregiving, generational caregiving, and also genetic concerns. Siblings might be concerned about passing along a disability to their own children. Let's flip the switch now to the good stuff, the silver linings. And, these are some common opportunities that we hear about frequently from siblings. And these are the things that we really want to try to build upon and support. And, when I talk about sib shops, I talk about how they're workshops for siblings of kids with disabilities, but they're also really celebrations. Okay, sib shops are not support groups. They're not therapy group or otherwise. We play fun games. Yes, we have opportunities to talk about our experiences as siblings, to build common ground with other people who really can understand and relate to our lives. But we also celebrate each other. And we do this through play and through laughter and through all kinds of fun and creative activities. And these are the kinds of things that can come up during, any given sim shop activity where we're talking about, the good stuff. So tolerance is one. We talk about diversity training, or maybe we used to talk about diversity training for siblings. That happens every day before breakfast. Okay, 365 days a year. Because siblings know what it's like to live with and love someone who is considered to be different. Okay. Advocacy, siblings are natural born advocates, not only for and with their brothers and sisters, but tend to be advocates for others as well and with others as well. Uh, Siblings tend to have a tremendous amount of insight. Even young siblings who come to our sib shops talk about, these sort of big themes, such as, the difference between ignorance and stupidity. And the way they describe it might be like, well, if someone's teasing your sibling and they don't really understand, they might just need more information, right? You might need to help them understand more. But if they're teasing your sibling and they know about their disability, well, that's just stupid. And we don't really want to be friends with them, right? Like these very, sort of wise perspectives for little people. Maturity, humor. I think many of us who have a family member with a disability would agree that we have a unique, if not slightly twisted sense of humor. And it's that idea that we, laugh or cry, sink or swim. Let's choose laughter and staying afloat. Humor can be a very powerful coping skill. Vocation research supports that many siblings go into helping professions, not all, but many. Pride, tremendous pride in the accomplishments of their brothers and sisters. Um, Inspiration that every day our brothers and sisters go out into a world that isn't designed for them, that isn't always accessible to them, and they still go out every day and make the most of every opportunity. Appreciation for our families, our own health, our own opportunities, and loyalty, right? Loyalty to our siblings, our families, and to the people who we allow to be close to us, right? Many siblings talk about how our brothers and sisters are kind of a litmus test, right? And they tell us a lot uh, about the people who enter our lives, right? We can tell a lot about a person, a new friend, a potential partner by the way they interact with our brothers and sisters, right? It tells us a lot about their character and who they are. And once we find those people, we hold on to those relationships dearly. We're very loyal. We nurture them mightily. So let's talk about how to support siblings across the lifespan. And this is really for providers. It's for you all, I think, to share with family members that you work with parents that you work with. If you are a parent, These are things that you can implement in your everyday life. Okay. And these are really designed to be tips that are easy, everyday things that we can do to help make the experiences of siblings a little bit, maybe a little bit easier. Okay. So the first thing is to provide siblings with age appropriate, culturally responsive information from a variety of sources. So many people on this Zoom are really, really expert at sharing information from a variety of sources, right? You've got your magic bag of all the resources, and you're really adept at pulling out the right ones for the right person at the right time. And I want to invite you to consider how you can do this for siblings. If we're talking about young children, I hope there are organizations that provide information on their website in a kid-friendly way, not only for siblings, but for generally children in the community. So maybe written information, digital information. Right now, there are more resources than ever before for siblings, and you can find a lot of them online. You can come to our website. There are many books, there are many films, there are more influencers now than ever in the sibling space, which you have to be wary of, right? In terms of like getting solid information. Also, think about professionals, think about clinicians. And how can we create opportunities for them to understand the value of spending 10 minutes with a sibling at the end of an appointment to answer any questions they might have? I'll tell you, that's one of the most powerful ways that we can share information with siblings. Ensure that they have opportunities to be included in those conversations with professionals. Very, very helpful. The second one, create opportunities for siblings to meet other siblings. Amazing. We love this. And guess what? I'm going to tell you that for school age siblings, we love to do this through sib shops. And I'm going to tell you where to find some in Minnesota soon in a slide or two. But I'll tell you that sib shops are not the only way. Okay. If we're talking about children, young children, maybe there are organizations in your community that serve people with disabilities, and maybe they have family events. Maybe it's a fun run or a buddy walk or a holiday gathering. Could they carve out some time for a sibling activity or a sibling team or some way for siblings to get together during this already scheduled, already planned event or activity? Right? That would be something that's relatively easy to build into a structure that already exists. If we're talking about parents, especially parents of very young children who might be scheduling play dates for their child with support needs, it can be a really nice idea to see if there might be a sibling who might get together with your typically developing kiddo, right? To think about pairing up siblings as well. And of course, there are um, always opportunities for siblings to find one another if they can connect to us. And again, if there isn't a sib shop in your local community, we're going to tell you how to start one. Okay. Practice effective communication. And this is like really the only thing I want you to remember. If you forget everything I say during this entire presentation, it's that siblings want to be heard and validated. Siblings want to be heard and validated. Most of the time, we cannot change the circumstances around what a sibling might be feeling, but by giving them a chance to share their thoughts and feelings and to validate those thoughts and feelings can be a tremendous act of support because it tells the sibling that they're not wrong for feeling what they feel and they're certainly not alone for feeling what they feel. So when we talk about effective communication, we really like the principles of active listening. And if you're not so knowledgeable about active listening, you can Google it. There are many books out there. We encourage parents and people working with particularly kids to look into the principles of active listening. But at the end of the day, the important thing is that siblings want to be heard and validated. We have a paper available on our website at no cost. We have a lot of free resources, and I'll give you the link at the end. And one of them is how to let young siblings know you care. And we interviewed a number of adult siblings reflecting on their experiences growing up. And we said, growing up, what made a difference to you? What is something that an adult did that made a positive difference in your life when you were a kid? And we had this one woman who was in her 50s at the time. She said, I still remember it. When I was very young, I remember once a nun asked me how I was doing and gave me a cookie. And I've never forgotten that act of kindness, that small act of kindness that made such a big difference and made me feel like I was important. Right. So small acts of kindness go a long way. Okay. Set aside special time with siblings. This is a great tip for parents, especially with young siblings, but also with adults. Um, and again, the good news here is that a little goes a long way. For parents of young siblings, it might be that they allow the sibling to stay up 20 minutes after they put the child with a disability to bed. So they have that 20 minutes together every night to do a puzzle or read something together or whatever. It might be bringing a sibling along to run errands. I remember growing up, for me, that was a really big deal to be able to run errands, with one of my parents, just me and that parent, and to have that special alone time, even if it was in a grocery store or picking up dinner or whatever. Um, so think about setting aside special time with siblings. And again, for adults, it's never too late. Um, Next one, learn more about life as a sibling. There are so many great resources out there, books, now films, documentaries. You can come to our website and learn about them. But learning more about different sibling experiences can really give us a broader context to understand the people we're supporting, right? So learn more about sibling experiences. Reassure children of all ages by making plans for the future and including siblings in that planning, right? And again, it's never too early and it's never too late for this. We like to say that future planning should begin early and happen frequently. And I think it begins with transition planning. Maybe it's the annual IEP meeting when children are young. And maybe it's asking siblings, hey, we're going to meet next week to talk about your sister's school next year. She'll have a new teacher and a new class. What do you think it's important for that teacher to know about your sister? Right? So to make sure that siblings are included in these conversations so that when we're talking about bigger leaps, like maybe after people age out of the special education system, which is a big leap indeed, and makes that transition into adult services, including siblings in that conversation can be really helpful. It's just the next natural step. And when we're planning for the future, when maybe parents are no longer available, that too is the next natural step in planning. And we've already created this foundation of talking about it as a family, right? So there are no unexpected surprises. So I say start early, and it's also never too late. Recently, a sibling posted, an adult sibling. We have an online group, a Facebook group for adult siblings. We have about 7,000 members. And a sibling in her 40s wrote, she said, my mom called me out of the blue the other day, and she said she realized that growing up with my brother wasn't always easy. And she said that she was sorry that she didn't acknowledge it more when I was a kid. And it meant so much to me that she took the time to say that. And she said that now that we really need to start planning for the future, we want to make sure that you're included in those discussions so that you don't feel like you have to take things on alone, maybe the way you felt growing up. Her mind was blown, right? And this is 40 years later, 40 something years later. So it's never too early and it's never too late, right? Just start those conversations. And then last but not least, remember that a parent's interpretation of and response to the disability or diagnosis really does set the tone for the entire family. We had a sibling on a panel recently, and she said, I remember when Evan got his diagnosis, her brother Evan, she said, I just remember I remember hearing all of these worried tones. She said, and I remember hearing the word autism. And I remember that when my parents were talking to my grandparents, my grandfather, who was a very stoic man, he cried. And it was the first time I'd ever seen him cry, right? And that experience really set the tone for her moving forward. And she said it wasn't until later when we started getting more information about autism and how to support Evan that I realized, this wasn't a death sentence. This wasn't a doom and gloom situation, that this was something that we could all respond to together to support Evan, that Evan was still the brother I knew and loved, and there were things we could do together to support him. So just to remember that, it's very, very important. All right, let me share just a few sibling resources for you all in Minnesota. The first is Sib Shops. I was saying to Kristen at the beginning, before you guys joined, I was a little sad to see that there are only 3 Sib Shops in the whole state of Minnesota, because it's a big state. You all know this. So here are the 3 at Children's in Minneapolis, Sib Shops of Eden Prairie, and there's one in Austin, Sibs at Life, Mower County. Is it Mower? So just those 3. If these are not close to you, if this is not going to help the families that you work with, we really hope that people who watch this and who are here with us today consider either starting a Sib shop in your community or working with an agency in your community to create that resource, right? You can do our online Sib shop facilitator training to get certified. We can come to Minnesota and do a training. There's a lot of different ways to do this. But at the end of the day, we want to ensure that busy parents don't have barriers to finding support for their other children. And I usually do air quotes when I say other, but busy parents who are, um, you know, trying to find services and supports for their children with disabilities and healthcare needs, they're already so stretched. And we do not want to create more work and unnecessary stress so that we want them to be able to find resources readily available to them for their other kids. We are just finishing up development of a new app for parents to use with preschool age children with support needs. It's called Sib Time, and it's available in English and Spanish. We just concluded our phase 2 of development of this app, so it's not on the market yet. Our goal is to bring this to families at no cost to families. And we are offering it for a limited time. We're not exactly sure what that's going to look like yet because it's literally hot off the presses. But we would love for different organizations to take advantage of this free trial and offer it to families and let their families use it. The benefit to us is that we will learn from you, what families think of it, what you think of it. It will give us more information to do as good a job as we can of getting that app into the hands of the people who need it. So please consider reaching out to Brandon if you or some agencies you might be working with would be interested in supporting preschoolers, the little guys, ages 4 to 6. For adult siblings, there's the Sibling Leadership Network, which is our partner organization. They work primarily with adult siblings. They have great advocacy and research resources. They have been using a state chapter model. There's no state chapter in Minnesota at the moment. Um, but, if there were adult siblings in Minnesota who wanted to start a state chapter, they could help them do that. But they still have a lot of really wonderful webinars and other great resources for adults. And then finally, if you come to our website, we have a resources page, and this includes everything from books, podcasts, films, resources on grief and loss, uh, just a whole different resources on whole different a wide variety of resources to share regarding siblings and how to support siblings. So please check them out. There are access to future planning resources, free future planning resources. So please do share that page with others. And that concludes my slides. So I want to thank you all for listening. I hope this was helpful in some way. I'm happy to answer any questions. And I will turn it back to Kristen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Emily. Just amazing information and really appreciate the resources you provided. I'm going to put in the chat your website, Disability Hub again, and then where the webinar recording will be available on our YouTube page. So that is there. I don't see any questions, but let me just double check before we sign off.
And if
No.
people want to unmute or can unmute, I don't know what the format is in the webinar, but if there's anything I said that you're curious about or want to know more about, or that sounded great, but how do I actually do it? I'm always happy to answer questions.
Wonderful. I don't see anything coming in. But please reach out to the website, the siblingsupport.org website, for more information. I've looked at it many, many times, and you have great
She
resources
spent
in there.
more time than she's wanted to on that website.
No,
Uh,
I love it. Yes, it's a very informational website, and there's a lot of great resources just on that site. So please be sure to check that out. And just again, thank you, Emily, for the time. And we know thank you everyone that sat with us during your lunch break and took in this information. We appreciate it. And yep, please check out the YouTube channel for the recording if you want to look at that or pass it along to any family or friends. Wonderful.
Sounds
Thank
great.
you
And
all.
many thanks to our ASL interpreter, Sander. Thank you so much for all your hard work, and to our captioner as well for making this presentation accessible. We appreciate that.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks,
Appreciate it.
everyone. Bye.